There's a flaw built into your body, not a birth defect, not a rare mutation, a flaw present in essentially every human being ever born, for roughly the last 200,000 years. And here is the strange part. Natural selection had unlimited time to fix it, running for millions of years before that, and it never did. The flaw is this. For a human female, the single most dangerous ordinary event her body will ever go through is giving birth. Not a disease, not an accident. A routine biological function that every mammal on this planet performs. Yet, in humans, it carries a level of danger with almost no real equal anywhere else in the animal kingdom. To see how strange that really is, look at the rest of the animal kingdom first. A newborn horse is standing on its own legs within an hour of birth. A newborn gazelle is running alongside its mother within minutes, because in the wild, standing still is a death sentence. Even our closest relatives have it easier. A female chimpanzee usually gives birth alone, high in a tree, and within hours she is moving again with a healthy infant, clinging to her own chest, guided out by her own hands. Across almost the entire mammal kingdom, birth is fast, birth is largely solitary, and birth works. Then there is us. A human woman in labor is looking at a process that typically takes many hours, sometimes more than a day. Her infant, unlike a chimpanzee's, will be born facing away from her, not toward her, which means she cannot simply reach down and lift it free the way a chimpanzee can. Her infant's head, relative to the size of the passage it has to travel through, is one of the tightest fits in the entire primate order. And almost no culture on Earth, in the entire span of recorded human history, has considered it normal for a woman to give birth completely alone. There is a reason for that, and it is not tradition. It is mechanics. So why? Why would a process this important, repeated across every single generation for millions of years, still be this dangerous? Evolution is supposed to sand down exactly this kind of flaw. Every generation, the individuals who survived birth most easily should have slowly outcompeted the ones who did not, until the danger disappeared. It never happened. And once you understand why, you start to see human birth not as a mistake evolution made, but as the visible scar of a war between two of the most successful adaptations our species ever produced. A war that, structurally, could never actually end. Here is trade-off number one, and it is the foundation of everything else. The human lineage has spent millions of years being rewarded for bigger brains. Bigger brains meant better tools, better cooperation, better memory, better prediction of a dangerous world, and all of that meant more surviving offspring. So brain size climbed, generation after generation, but a bigger brain needs a bigger skull, and a bigger skull has to pass through the birth canal on the way out. There is no way around that. The birth canal had to grow to keep pace with the brain, or birth itself would become impossible. Here is trade-off number two, and it is the one most people never think about. The same lineage that was growing bigger brains was also walking upright on two legs, which is, biomechanically, an extremely demanding way to move. Efficient walking depends on a pelvis of very specific proportions. The angle of the hip joints, the way the muscles stabilize your hips every time your weight shifts onto a single leg mid-stride, all of it depends on a pelvis that is not too wide. Widen the pelvis enough to make birth easy, and you make every single step less efficient for the rest of that woman's life. This is not a small cost. Across a lifetime of walking, running, and carrying, that inefficiency adds up to a real, measurable energy tax. So, there is the trap. A wider pelvis helps with birth and hurts with walking. A narrower pelvis helps with walking and hurts with birth. Evolution could not simply pick the winning trait, because both traits were winning in different currencies at the same time. This tension is known among researchers as the obstetric dilemma, and it has been studied since the middle of the 20th century. But it turns out this tug of war is not the whole story. There is a third trade-off hiding underneath it, and it might be just as important as the first two combined. Trade-off number three is metabolic, not mechanical. The human brain is staggeringly expensive to run. In an adult, it burns through roughly 1/5 of all daily calories, despite being a small fraction of total body weight. In a developing fetus, the cost is proportionally even higher. That expense puts a hard ceiling on how long a pregnancy can safely continue, completely separate from the size of the pelvis. If a human pregnancy tried to continue as long, relative to development, as a chimpanzee pregnancy does, the fetus's brain would eventually demand more energy than the mother's body could supply without starving herself. Somewhere around the 38th to 40th week, that equation runs out of room. Birth happens not only because the head has reached the physical limit of the pelvis, but because the mother's own metabolism has simultaneously reached its limit. Stack these three trade-offs on top of each other, brain size against pelvic width. pelvic width against walking efficiency, and pregnancy length against maternal metabolism, and you get the exact situation ancient women faced. A birth that is mechanically tight, that takes far longer than it does in almost any other mammal, and that produces one of the most helpless newborns on the entire planet. A newborn chimpanzee arrives with a brain already close to half its adult size, strong enough to cling to its mother unaided. A human newborn arrives with a brain at roughly a quarter of its adult size, unable to hold up its own head, unable to regulate its own temperature, unable to survive even one day without constant help from someone else. In the most literal developmental sense, every human being alive was born early, not because anything went wrong, because staying inside any longer was never an option the body could afford. That helplessness did not stay contained to the delivery room. It rewired human society around it. A woman who survived birth was immediately handed years, not weeks, of a dependent infant who needed far more support than she alone could give, while also recovering from the most physically demanding event of her life. Groups that built real systems around this, shared caregiving, food sharing, experienced women who specialized in birth and infant survival, raised more children to adulthood than groups that left mothers to handle it alone. Which means the very difficulty of human birth may have quietly pushed our species toward cooperation, community, and the kind of extended social bonds that most other animals never needed to develop at all. Before we go further, if this kind of deep dive into what our ancestors actually survived is your thing, I put together a full course called The Secret Lives of Ancient Humans, 10 modules, over 3 hours of material on everything that never makes it into a typical history video. What they were afraid of, how they actually communicated before written language, what hunted them in the dark. There is a free PDF guide included, and the link is sitting right below this video. Now, back to the trade-off that never got resolved. Here is where the mechanics get genuinely strange, because a large head and a narrow canal alone do not fully explain how dangerous this process is. A human infant has to perform a maneuver that essentially no other primate infant needs to attempt. Entering the pelvis, the head is turned sideways, lined up with the widest part of the entrance. Partway through the canal, without any help from the mother, the head has to rotate roughly 90 degrees because the widest part of the exit runs in a completely different direction than the widest part of the entrance. Nothing is guiding this rotation except the physical shape of the canal itself. If it happens correctly, the head clears. If it stalls or happens only partway, the head can become lodged, a complication called obstructed labor. Historically, one of the leading causes of maternal death anywhere surgery was not available, and there is a second consequence hiding inside that same rotation. Because of the direction the head has to turn, the infant is born facing away from its mother, not toward her. That single detail means the mother physically cannot reach down and pull her own baby free without risking bending its spine in the wrong direction. This is very likely the real mechanical reason why virtually every human culture ever studied treats birth as something you do not do completely alone. It is not superstition. It is anatomy, expressed as tradition. The women who specialized in managing this, the experienced attendants present at almost every birth in almost every ancient culture, were carrying knowledge that existed nowhere except inside their own memory. How to tell ordinary, slow labor from labor that was actually failing. How to reposition an infant caught at a bad angle. How to recognize dangerous bleeding early enough to respond. None of it was written down anywhere, because writing itself did not yet exist for most of the time this knowledge was being refined. It was passed directly from one woman to another, through watching and doing. If a small group lost its most experienced birth attendants, through death, through disaster, through simple bad luck, that group did not just lose a person. It lost a survival technology with no backup copy. Which brings us back to the question that should still be nagging at you. If a slightly wider pelvis would have made all of this safer, why didn't it just happen? The honest answer is that it did. Partially, but only up to a point that a woman's body could still afford. A wider pelvis does not just cost something on the day of birth. It costs something every single day for the rest of a woman's life, in the form of a small but real increase in the energy needed to walk, caused by extra side-to-side sway in the hips with every stride. In a world where every calorie had to be physically earned, that ongoing cost mattered just as much as the one-time risk of a difficult birth. The body did find one clever partial fix along the way. Late in pregnancy, a hormone called relaxin loosens the ligaments around the pelvis, allowing it to flex and widen very slightly during labor itself, without permanently changing a woman's day-to-day walking efficiency. It helps. It does not solve the problem. It is a patch, not a fix. More recent research has also found that this compromise is not identical in every population. Pelvic geometry varies more across different human groups than the original models assumed, shaped by the specific mix of pressures each ancestral population faced. The trade-off was never locked to one universal setting. It was tuned slightly differently everywhere humans settled. And there is one final twist worth sitting with. The cesarean section, the modern fix for the exact failure mode ancient women could not survive, is quietly doing something evolution itself was never able to do. Women and infants who once would have died from a fatal mismatch between head size and pelvis now routinely survive it and go on to pass those same traits forward. Researchers studying this have suggested, carefully, that the selection pressure, which used to punish an overly narrow pelvis, may already be loosening because of it. That is not a criticism of modern medicine, which has saved an extraordinary number of lives and will keep doing so. It is simply a reminder that a technology barely a century old may already be nudging an equation that took millions of years to balance in the first place. So why did evolution never fix ancient childbirth? Because there was never a version of the fix that did not cost something evolution valued just as much. Shrink the brain, and you lose the intelligence that built everything about how humans survive. Widen the pelvis past a certain point, and you lose the walking efficiency that built everything about how humans move and hunt and travel. Slow the metabolic clock of pregnancy, and you risk starving the mother trying to feed a brain that has not finished growing. Every possible solution was blocked by another trait evolution was simultaneously trying to protect. The result was never going to be a fix. It was only ever going to be a compromise, one narrow enough to keep working, generation after generation, without ever becoming safe. Ancient women did not need a lecture on evolutionary trade-offs to understand any of this. They understood it by attending births that ended well and births that did not, by losing mothers, sisters, and friends to a process with no safety margin to spare, by carrying forward, generation after generation, the precise, hard-won knowledge of exactly how much danger that margin actually held. The rituals, the attendants, the accumulated skill passed from woman to woman were never just culture for its own sake. They were the repair evolution itself was never able to make. Every person watching this right now is descended, without exception, from women who survived the single most dangerous ordinary event the human body ever built. The flaw is still there. It never got fixed. What changed is that, generation after generation, we built the only thing capable of covering for it: each other.